Ava sat in the courtroom, her fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. The air felt heavy, like the room itself disapproved of what was happening. Her parents, people she hadn't spoken to in years, stood in front of the judge, arguing over the inheritance of the man who had truly raised her, her grandfather. They spoke with practiced emotion, spinning stories of connection and sacrifice. But Ava knew the truth. They hadn't even come to the hospital when he was dying. They didn't call. Didn't care. And now they were here, dressed in black and dripping with fake grief, trying to take everything he had left behind. She wanted to scream, to call them out for what they were. But instead, she stayed quiet, letting their lies fill the room like smoke. She had something they didn't know. One piece of paper that her grandfather had given her in his final days. He told her, when the time comes, this will protect the truth. She hadn't understood then. But now, as her mother accused her of manipulating an old man for money, she finally did. The judge looked over at Ava, asking if she had anything to say. She stood, her heart pounding. Her voice was soft but clear as she handed the judge a folded, time-worn paper. Her parents stared, confused. The judge read in silence. His brows furrowed. Then, he picked up the phone. Within minutes, police entered the courtroom. Her father's past, fraud, financial abuse, everything, was laid bare. Ava didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just stood quietly, the storm finally breaking around her. She hadn't won money that day. She had defended love, memory, and truth. And her grandfather, even in death, had protected her one last time. Ava remembered the scent of fresh soil, the way the sun bathed their little garden in gold, and how her grandfather's laugh could melt even the hardest day. He wasn't just family, he was her anchor, her teacher, her safe place in a world that had often felt too cold. While her parents chased status and wealth, her grandfather taught her how to plant tomatoes, how to mend torn books, how to listen, not just to words, but to silence. One evening, as autumn leaves rustled outside the kitchen window, he reached across the table with a trembling hand and slid a small sealed envelope toward her. His eyes, tired but full of something deeper than fear, locked with hers. "They'll come for what's not theirs," he whispered. "Not because they love me, but because they think I'm worth more dead than alive." Ava didn't know what to say. Her hands touched the envelope carefully, unsure of the weight it carried. "But the truth," he said gently, "is bigger than money. Bigger than greed. This," he nodded at the paper, "isn't for revenge. It's for protection. Yours. Mine. Ours." He smiled, the corners of his eyes creasing like folded pages of a well-loved book. "Use it only when it matters most." That night stayed with her. More than any holiday, more than any birthday. It wasn't about the paper. It was about trust, about knowing that someone believed in her enough to pass down not just memories, but the responsibility of truth. Ava had never opened it early. Not out of fear, but out of love. Because part of her hoped she'd never need it. But deep down, she knew the day would come. And when it did, she'd be ready. The courtroom buzzed with tension, her parents still spinning stories, painting themselves as the loving son and daughter who had been wronged by their own child. Ava could feel the heat rising in her chest, her pulse echoing in her ears. But instead of shouting, instead of arguing, she reached into her bag and pulled out the yellowed envelope, the same one her grandfather had given her years ago. Her hands trembled as she stood. The room seemed to still. Her voice was soft, almost breaking, but every word carried weight. "I have something the court needs to see." She crossed the floor, each step heavier than the last, and handed the paper to the judge. He opened it slowly, scanning the fragile sheet. His expression shifted as he read, calm curiosity becoming quiet alarm. Silence fell across the room like a curtain. It wasn't a will. Not a plea. It was a handwritten confession, signed by her father. Years ago, he had forged documents, siphoned money from his own father's accounts, left traces that he thought were buried forever. He assumed the letter had been destroyed. But her grandfather had saved it. Not out of spite, but out of hope. Hope that one day, truth would find its voice. The judge looked up sharply. Without a word, he picked up the courtroom phone. Moments later, security entered. Then uniformed officers. Gasps rippled through the room. Ava's father stood frozen. Her mother turned pale. Ava didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't fought. She had simply brought the truth into the light. And let it speak for itself. In a world full of noise, it was quiet honesty that shook the room. The courtroom, once filled with confident voices and sharp arguments, fell into a sudden, breathless silence. All eyes turned as the heavy doors swung open and uniformed officers marched in. The sound of boots on polished floors echoed like thunder. Ava didn't flinch. Her father's confident smirk drained into terror. His hands trembled, the color draining from his face. Her mother staggered, clutched the edge of a bench, and collapsed in a faint. Even the judge looked stunned, the confession still in his hands, now an undeniable truth etched in black ink. One officer approached her father, another read out charges with cold precision: fraud, forgery, financial abuse of an elder. Terms Ava had never spoken aloud but had carried in her heart for years. The very crimes that tore her grandfather's trust apart were no longer hidden behind charm or deception. They were official. Real. Exposed. The courtroom, once a place where Ava felt small and voiceless, had transformed. Not into a battleground, but into a stage for truth. She didn't feel victorious. She felt steady. Anchored. Like the roots her grandfather once showed her in the garden, deep, quiet, unshakable. The judge nodded at her with a kind of silent respect, as if to say, "You did what few could have done." Ava didn't speak. She didn't have to. Justice had arrived, not with rage, not with revenge, but with a piece of paper and the courage to reveal what others tried to hide. What was once buried now stood in full view. And for the first time in years, the weight on her chest began to lift. The morning sun spilled over the garden, warming the soil her grandfather once tilled with care. Ava knelt by the flower bed, watering the same rows where they used to plant marigolds and mint. The air was quiet, peaceful, nothing like the chaos of the courtroom days before. On the porch sat a framed photo of him, smiling in that way that always made her feel safe. She placed her hand gently over the earth, remembering his voice, his stories, his steady presence. He never raised his voice, never demanded anything. But his actions, small, kind, deliberate, had built a legacy stronger than any courtroom victory. A little voice broke her thoughts. A neighborhood boy, dirt on his knees and a sapling in his hands, looked up at her. "Can I help?" Ava smiled. Of course. Together, they dug a small hole and planted the flower, simple, quiet, beautiful. Just like everything her grandfather stood for. As she watched the young boy pat the soil with care, her heart swelled, not with pride, but with peace. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need applause. What mattered had already been passed down: truth, love, and the courage to protect both. Her grandfather had taught her that truth doesn't shout, it endures. And sometimes, justice isn't a loud moment in a courtroom. It's a quiet seed, planted in love, that grows strong enough to break through even the hardest ground. In that moment, under the open sky, Ava knew, his legacy wasn't in the paper that changed everything, it was in the way she chose to live. And she chose love. This is not just a story about courtroom drama or exposing hidden crimes, it's a story about truth, love, and the quiet strength passed down through generations. Ava didn't fight with anger. She didn't seek revenge. She carried the weight of her grandfather's trust, and when the time came, she honored it, not with noise, but with grace and courage. Her father's lies were loud. Her mother's greed was loud. But in the end, it was Ava's quiet act, handing over a single, honest piece of paper, that brought justice. This story reminds us that the greatest legacies aren't written in wills or measured in money, they're built in gardens, in gentle hands, in memories shared between hearts. Sometimes, it only takes one act of love, one moment of integrity, to change everything. Because the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to carry it.